I am happy to have the opportunity to study and talk about a political and economic theory that many have implemented throughout our world over the last 100 years. Socialism is a theory which, at times, has dominated the minds and the voices of our intellectual, political, and cultural leaders, and at other times, at even the hint of its acceptance, has been politically and culturally destructive for them. In America, understanding democratic socialism has once again become important. Regardless of what is happening at this moment politically, if there is a democratic socialist leading our country as president, or if democratic socialists are, to a great extent, influencing our president, or if they are inspiring our local communities and culture, in all of these cases, understanding and discerning the real intentions of democratic socialism is an essential activity for all freedom-loving Americans. Many of us older Americans who grew up during the Cold War between America and the Soviet Union have seen the fruits of socialism, so we are aware of its dangers. We must ask ourselves, is democratic socialism saturated with the same dangers as authoritarian socialism? The answer to this question is of even greater consequence since many among our younger generations are embracing socialism. A 2018 Gallup poll reveals that 51% of Americans between 18 and 29 have remained in favor of socialism from 2010 up to 2018. However, in the same period, the same age group has seen a 12% decline from 68 to 45% in their positive view of capitalism. Today, democratic socialism is being pushed by many in our American universities, by many of our politicians, and by many of our fellow citizens as a solution to some of the past and current injustices. While it is true that any reasonable American will recognize that current and past injustices did and still do exist, the nature and the solution to those injustices are still up for debate. While that is an extremely significant debate, the purpose of this discussion is not to address those issues directly. The purpose of this discussion is to consider whether or not democratic socialism, by its nature and by the current policies being pursued, is better equipped to manage injustices in our society than our current economic and political system, and whether or not democratic socialism will create new injustices in our society. Should we begin our efforts, like many are apt to do, by denouncing what we don't understand? Or should we begin our efforts by first striving to better understand democratic socialism? A better understanding begins with answering questions like, what is democratic socialism? What is democratic socialism trying to accomplish? How does democratic socialism plan to accomplish their goals? And is democratic socialism a movement we should oppose or support? My approach to gaining a better understanding of democratic socialism began with a study of some influential authors and books on both sides of the argument. I chose to study the most popular political party associated with democratic socialism in America today, the Democratic Socialists of America. This is the party of many American political leaders, women like Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib. For my research of this political party, I have mostly used the Democratic Socialists of America website, their recommended readings, and a book called The Socialist Manifesto, The Case for Radical Politics in an Era of Extreme Inequality, which was authored by Bhaskar Sankara. Bhaskar Sankara is an American political writer, the founding editor and publisher of the socialist magazine Jacobin, and the former vice chair of the Democratic Socialists of America. The three primary authors which I chose to help me better understand the weaknesses of socialism are Friedrich Hayek, Thomas Sowell, and Thomas Di Lorenzo. Friedrich Hayek was an Austrian-British economist and philosopher who was a co-recipient of the 1974 Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences. Thomas Sowell is an American economist who studied at Harvard, Columbia, and the University of Chicago, and is currently a senior fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution. And Thomas Di Lorenzo is currently an economics professor at Loyola University. In addition, my primary source for better understanding free market capitalism is a set of lectures from Gary Wolfram at Hillsdale College. While I'm not personally an expert on economics or on democratic socialism, one motivation and one possible advantage I have towards answering these questions is that I lived in a socialist country for many years, and therefore have an idea of what daily life could feel like under democratic socialism. Even though I'm an American, my family and I lived and worked in China for almost 10 years. We loved living in China. We love the Chinese people, and we still miss living in China. However, the average Chinese person has about as much influence on the Chinese government as we Americans have on the Chinese government. If you have some knowledge of the Chinese government, you will recognize that the Chinese government isn't completely identical to the democratic socialism that is being pursued by many in America today. The Chinese government is nominally, that is, in name only, a communist country, but they call themselves socialist with Chinese characteristics. In practice, this means that they are socialists, i.e., government-controlled, in the more essential areas of power, but they are capitalists, i.e., allow private ownership and profits in non-essential areas of power. As I will point out in my discussion, this is similar to where democratic socialism is leading and should therefore give us pause. My purpose for referring to my experience living in China is not to pursue the differences between the Chinese government and the American form of democratic socialism, but instead to point to one major similarity that may be a concern. The most essential aspects of life in China, politically, socially, and economically, are under the control of the government. The government has complete authority over the vital industries, infrastructure, education, and collective goals of Chinese society. This is the feature of the American form of democratic socialism, which has the potential to be as bad or worse than in China. My discussion will focus on the existential aspect of democratic socialism, that is to say, what our day-to-day existence could be like under democratic socialism. I will admit that since I have previously studied the history and philosophy of authoritarian socialism, when I began my study of democratic socialism, my view of socialism was not good. Still, as I began my study of democratic socialism, I hoped that democratic socialism would not be nearly as bad as authoritarian socialism. However, I came to the unfortunate conclusion that while it may be true that democratic socialism has the possibility to reduce the evils that always exist within authoritarian socialism, those evils will still exist and can still exist at a very high degree. And that is especially true with the form of democratic socialism being pursued by many in America. Also, since I do not have the time to discuss every feature of both democratic socialism and free market capitalism in such a short presentation. Only focusing on specific features of the systems will be necessary. I will attempt to choose a few of the most essential features of each economic system which are consistent with answering the questions which relate to my central position for this discussion. However, before I state my position for this presentation, I would like to begin with an area of agreement among both sides. In Free to Choose, Milton Friedman, who was a free market capitalist, said, "Everywhere in the world, there are gross inequities in income and wealth. They offend most of us. Few can fail to be moved by the contrast between the luxury enjoyed by some and the grinding poverty suffered by others." This is a reality that does exist, and this reality offends both free market capitalists and democratic socialists. However, there is wide disagreement over what should be done and what can be done to alleviate or solve the problem. To state my position for this discussion clearly, I believe that free market capitalism is superior to democratic socialism because free market capitalism intrinsically reinforces individual freedom due to the nature of free market capitalism and due to the means by which it achieves its goal, while democratic socialism intrinsically undermines individual freedom due to the nature of democratic socialism and due to the means by which it achieves its goal. This is the position I will defend and will attempt to persuade you to accept and defend for the remainder of my discussion.